Okay, we should be live.
Great.
Let me just make sure. So you are in what state?
I live in Florida.
Florida. Okay. How far from Disney World?
Quite a ways. Florida's a weird shaped state.
Okay. So the first time I even heard about you was on the Street Epistemology channel today, and you started talking, and I go, "Hey, wait a minute, this guy sounds a little bit familiar." And so you were what type of Christian were you exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I underwent kind of a, I underwent some doctrinal transformations here and there, but I would say I started out as like a King James only, holiness, ultra conservative Christian.
King James
That
only?
was yeah.
Wow.
That was in my younger years as a Christian. I was pretty. I just kind of believed what the church I happened to be going to at the time, kind of taught.
Okay, I
So
got to ask you something about the King James only,
yeah,
because there might be a lot of Christians watching this on the replay. In my experience, I've always felt, now please don't take offense to this, but I've always felt that the King James only Christians, that there was something off about them. Um, do you know what I'm talking about? It's just,
I do, and yeah, the denomination that I was a part of at the time, like the King James only thing, wasn't like one of their like loud and proud like doctrinal issues. Like I've seen churches that have King James only on the church sign. Like that's it. Like they're really King James only. This church just happened to use for some reason just King James only, but you never really heard them talk about it. It was more the church that I went to at this time was more known for its like holiness standards. So I'm talking like men with short hair, women with long hair, women with skirts, only skirts, women with only long hair. They were
head
forbidden to cut
coverings.
their hair. No, not head coverings, but they had to have long hair. They could not wear makeup, like that kind of holiness tradition.
Wow. Okay.
Speaking in tongues.
Did do the King James only people know that, like, for example, the first King James Bible out there had the Apocrypha in it, and because they have this idea that this is the only Bible that's the true Bible, but yet if they look at history, it's like it had the Roman Catholic Apocrypha in there. Like, do you think they realize that?
Yeah, it's such a naive position to hold. I mean, it's another good example of like just the crazy stuff that we can convince ourselves sometimes of.
Your picture's still really bad, but that's okay. We can hear you loud and clear, I think. But okay, so you were kind of born and raised in a very conservative Christian would you consider fundamental? I'm assuming so.
Yeah, yeah, and just to clarify, I wasn't born and raised in it. This was like after like when I left. I was already like 18 at 19 at this time.
Oh, really?
Um,
So what were you born and raised into then? Like, were your parents Christian?
a lot, yeah. I mean, I was raised by my mom, and she wasn't religious at all, but she brought us to Catholic church. Sometimes it wasn't really a big thing. We weren't what I would call like a religious home, but I would go to Catholic church service sometimes. I had First Holy Communion, stuff like that. But it wasn't really a big thing.
Okay,
But
so
it
you were
was
born
like
and raised Catholic then, Roman Catholic.
yeah, sort of, yeah, Catholic culturally at least.
Okay, and then when you turned 18 or what age were you when you kind of saw the truth of the Protestants?
Yep. So I was about, I don't know, not, I guess I might have even been like 20 years old actually at this time. I was in the military, and there was this church near the military base where I was stationed, and they had a really heavy evangelism program where they would have people come on base and invite you out to church and stuff like that. So it was very welcoming to the service members. I felt a strong sense of community with my fellow military members. And so, some of it was that, but it just gave me a home, for somebody who was young and in the military and away from home. it really provided me with a sense of community. And this
I've
also
always I've always thought that the first religious group that reaches out to a person to, who's looking for community, who's looking for, let's say, meaning and purpose and so forth. I still remember on Blab, a guy was telling me a sob story of his life and said the Mormons knocked on his door and they gave him community and love. And wouldn't you know it, he's a Mormon today. Like, do you think you're the type of guy that if on this military base there would have been a Muslim community that gave you this sense of community and belonging, you would be a Muslim today? Or do you think that's because of your Roman Catholic background that would have been too far-fetched?
No, I definitely think it's possible. I mean, that's where we're social creatures, I mean, I think that's one of the big draws of religion is the social network that it provides for you.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you're on the military base. You have these big arms wrapping around you called your fellow, your Army, Navy? No, not Navy.
It was Navy.
It was Navy. Okay.
Yep.
So they wrapped these big, loving Jesus arms around you, and you became a Christian.
Yep. And then so I was in that denomination for like a year or two, something like that. And then I started having doubts. And here you can already see like foreshadowings of my skeptical mindset. But I started having doubts about the doctrine of speaking in tongues. As well as the King James only thing, but it was mostly speaking in tongues. And I started reading the Bible and started interacting with other Christians from other traditions and started having doubts. Like, I don't know if this is really like a biblical doctrine or not. And I ended up leaving the denomination for that reason.
Okay. So I'm assuming the guys on the Navy base were Pentecostals then. Yeah.
This particular church. Yeah. They were like, pretty much Pentecostal, speaking in tongues, stuff like that. So it was just something that I came doctrinally speaking to disagree with.
Did you feel like, because I'm assuming you couldn't speak in tongues, right?
No, I could, and I did. I mean,
you could, you did. Do you?
Yeah, it feels silly saying it now, but yeah.
Do you feel you can still speak in tongues?
I probably could if I wanted to. It's kind of silly to even try, honestly, but. Yeah, if I wanted to, I probably could.
Well, believe it or not, I have a friend, a wife of a very good friend of mine who is a non-believer now, and she can still speak in tongues just like that, no problem. In fact, I have a video where she does it, and she says she still gets the same feelings as an atheist. That euphoria, the adrenaline, it activates something in your brain that just makes you feel really good. And I was just curious if you've tried that.
I haven't. Yeah, that sounds like a good experiment.
So the next time you're feeling a little low, maybe as an atheist, just start speaking in tongues, and that'll pep you right up.
There you go. Yeah.
But it's so interesting that your first doubt was a doctrinal thing, and not so much like creation or contradictions in the Bible. It was more like, is this really from God or something, right?
Yeah, and actually that was kind of like it would end up being the trajectory of my story in Christianity and coming out of it is I would undergo enough doctrinal transformations where I eventually got the idea to be humble about anything that I think I know. And to be open to the idea that I could be wrong, because I had found out I had been wrong, several times.
I just want to make sure, guys, I'm turning off my mic so you guys don't hear my kids in the background. But when I turn off my mic, let me know if you don't hear Raul for any reason in the chat. Give me a message. So, so you're doubting, and then what happened? Like, did you feel like, no, I can't doubt this because this core propositions are still true? How did you deal with this?
Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty clean cut. I mean, it took me a while to think about it, but once I came to the decision, I met with the pastor. I told him my intentions. I said, you know, I just feel like I need to leave the church for this reason. And, you know, so there wasn't too much drama with that. But from there, I started also at that time thinking about the doctrine of salvation, and started studying Calvinism. And that was interesting, because when I left this fundamentalist holiness church, I started going to a Free Will Baptist church, which is very non-Calvinist. I mean, by definition, Free Will Baptist. And yeah, it's a funny name to name your church that. But and so I was going to this Free Will Baptist church for a little bit, not full-blown member, but just going weekly. And then I started studying Calvinism, and I eventually was drawn to that and started going to a Presbyterian church.
Okay, now I got to ask this: what in the world would draw you to Calvinism? What about it?
Well, I can see what you're saying there, because logically, yeah, it's kind of a ridiculous thing to believe in. It's not. I'll say this: it's not intuitive. It's not. People don't arrive at it like intuitively. It's because of certain scriptural arguments, certain passages in scripture that can be read a certain way.
Okay. So my problem with Calvinism when I was a Christian was not that it was logically, it had any problems. In fact, I think it's in a lot of ways the most consistent form of Christianity. But my problem is it makes God look really bad. In fact, just today, I asked, I think he was a Calvinist, I asked him, how do I become a Christian? I want to become like you. How do I do it? That's a hard question for a Calvinist to answer.
Yeah.
Because, well, how would you answer that as a Calvinist? Pretend you're a Calvinist. I want to become Christian. How do I do it?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard Calvinist preachers like answer a question like that by simply saying, you can't do anything. You need to ask God to give you the desire to believe. And so they wouldn't even say believe merely. They would say, you need to ask God for the desire to believe itself. Yes,
exactly. And when I haven't interviewed Calvinists in a while, but when I do interview them, I'll even say, you know, I don't even have the desire to ask for the desire. Because I don't believe your God exists. So how can I sincerely ask something I don't believe exists for the desire? You know, and they kind of just throw their hands up, like, because technically just to cry out to this God concept that they have would be a good thing, right? You know, just to humbly cry out and ask for the God of the universe to give you this desire to serve him. That would be a good thing I could do. But yet I'm totally depraved. So how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah, really. And you talked about it being a pretty logically consistent doctrine, or logically consistent system, and it is. And that's another appeal of it, is not just the scriptural arguments that come with their own kind of force when read a certain way, but it's that the way it all fits together.
Yeah, I agree. And it kind of shuts down. Oh, who's this? Look at the hair on that guy.
Yeah, this is little Raul.
Hi, little Raul. I'm little Doug.
Hey, we gotta go ahead. Can you go get mommy? I'm doing an interview with a friend. Can you go get mommy? Ask her to. There you go.
Oh, speaking of mommy. I'm assuming your wife was a Christian when you got married?
Yeah, so at this time in my story, we haven't met yet. Me and my wife, we had not met. So I said I started going to that Presbyterian church, really drawn to Calvinism, and I started studying a lot, just being drawn to the beauty of the doctrine, what's known as the doctrines of grace. So the emphasis is on God's grace, and so that's kind of like the thing that as ugly as some of the doctrines are in Calvinism, what offsets it, what causes people to embrace it in spite of those things, is the grace aspect. That yes, God is stern, God is holy, God is wrathful, but he's shown such grace to you that he's even given you the desire you didn't even have. And so it captures the heart somewhat. And so that's another thing that kind of drew me to it. But Anyway, so I was studying Calvinism, going to this Presbyterian church. At that time, I moved to a different duty station in the Navy again, and I found a great Reformed Baptist church, which was also strongly Calvinistic, and also this particular Baptist church had a team of young pastors who were kind of hip, kind of Mark Driscoll type pastors. If you're familiar with him, he was a pastor of a church in Seattle, kind of a hip, young, kind of hipster type church. Anyway, but they were theologically sound from my perspective, and theologically interested, and so they really fed that hunger that I had for this kind of doctrine. And so I started going there, and that's where me and my wife met. She around the same time she moved up to that same area to go to Bible school to interpret the Bible, and that's how we met. We met
at this point. Church. At this point in your Christian life, how did you view atheists?
At this point, honestly, I hadn't really studied it too much. I hadn't at this point. I had not really engaged with the atheist Christian debate, but because of my interest in Calvinism, I was also being drawn to presuppositionalism, which is the form of apologetics that is just the beloved approach of Reformed folk. So because of my interest in that, I started thinking more about the Christian atheist thing.
Okay, yeah. So I've dealt with Precepts quite a bit. Does the Raul that you are today look back at the Raul you were back then? And do you like that guy?
You know, I try to be understanding of that guy. You know what I mean? Like I try to cut myself a little slack. Okay. You know, it's hard to say. I had some blind spots. Let's put it that way.
Like, but were you the type of precept who would say, "Hey, Doug, could you be wrong about everything you know, or anything you know?" Mm-hmm. You know, would you drill down with those types of questions of, could you be wrong about your reasoning, or is your reasoning valid? Could you be wrong about you having valid reasoning?
Yeah.
And
yeah, I would definitely use those arguments.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So now the $1 million question is, you move from like a quasi-Catholic type background, Roman Catholic type background, to a charismatic. By the way, besides the Catholic thing, you and I are mirroring each other. It's similar background, except I was never a precept. But you went to the charismatic was your first foot into Christianity, and then you went into Presbyterian Calvinism. What got you out of that?
So what got me out of that? So, So I would say probably my next major doctrinal transformation would have been, my movement out of Calvinism and also presuppositionalism, because they're so related. But what got me out of that was studying scripture and realizing that the way Calvinists interpret scripture was flawed. It was a flawed interpretation, and they were reading certain things into the text that I didn't think were there.
Okay. Now I'm sure many Calvinists would say, what exactly was these things? But I don't want to bore the crowd with that. But so you had these problems with scripture, and then what did you do? This didn't take you out of Christianity, it doesn't sound like.
Yeah, so at that point, I'm no longer a Calvinist. I'm also moved away from presuppositionalism, but I'm still attending a Presbyterian church that technically is Calvinistic. And at this point, I met a friend in college who he was a Christian when I first met him as a freshman in college. But after about a year in college, he actually became an atheist. And after that event, I kind of set in my mind that I'm going to study this atheism thing, and I'm going to listen to atheists, because next time I run into a friend who's leaving Christianity, who's considering leaving Christianity and has these arguments. Next time this happens, I'm going to be ready, because I didn't feel like I was ready. He had some questions that I feel like I didn't give good answers for. And I was like, next time I'm going to be so aware of the arguments that atheists use that I'm going to have something prepared.
But weren't you scared, though, by studying the counterpoints, the counter worldview, that you might not be taking every thought captive to Christ? Weren't you scared that you might be walking down a path and not running the good race? Weren't you scared that you might be putting your eternal destiny in jeopardy?
No, not. I mean, my confidence in God was high, and my estimation of atheism was low. Like I really, atheism is the last thing that I would have seen, last direction I would have seen myself going, because the arguments were just so poor. And especially with my presuppositional background, I was so aware in my mind of how poor of a foundation atheism has for accounting for the world. And you can already hear the presuppositional language coming out of my, and because of that, I wasn't scared. I was emboldened by my awareness of what atheism had to offer and how little that was.
Okay, so you start studying the stuff from your former Christian friend who's now an atheist. What happened? You met up with him and he asked you a question that you couldn't answer, and boom, you were an atheist, or what happened?
No, not at all. So my interaction with him, they weren't that in depth, but he was like he just got me thinking. He got me thinking, you know what? I need to be ready to answer these kind of objections better next time. And so his particular objection was, how is it that God could set Adam and Eve in the garden knowing that they would fail, knowing that sin would enter the world? It doesn't make sense, because he knew it was going to happen. And that was his objection. And at the time, like I said, I didn't feel like I had a good answer. So from that point, I just started exposing myself to, I was a big podcaster. I love listening to podcasts. So I subscribed to a bunch of atheist podcasts, as well as some Christian apologist podcasts. And I started just listening to their arguments. And I wanted to place myself in the position where I had thought about it again and again. I had mulled over their arguments.
Okay, but now I'm getting a little hot under the collar, because if it worked for you, or at least got you to doubt, like I've asked that question to, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 precepts, that exact same thing. Like, if God is omniscient, then he is at least in some way responsible for his creation. And that's even couching it in a very favorable light, the way I just phrased it, but the bottom line is, if you believe in a God that knows with 100% certainty what's about to happen, and you stick them in this garden, but it doesn't seem to affect them at all. But maybe they're just putting up a wall, and maybe late at night when they put their head in their pillow, they go, oh. But do you think there is a personality type that maybe that question affected you more than, let's say, another Christian?
I mean, a lot of the podcasts that I loved listening to were those podcasts, whether they were atheist or Christian, but those podcasts that brought both sides together, and that gave the other side a fair listening to. Like, so like I'm talking about, like, if you ever heard of like the Unbelievable podcast, just for instance, which is run by a Christian, but he always brings people from opposing viewpoints together to talk about these things, and others as well. But those are the kinds that I was always drawn to. So I guess it could be a certain openness to my personality, I guess. But don't forget also what I said earlier, as far as I had been wrong before. Like I was open. Not at this point. Like I was still pretty entrenched in my Christianity. I didn't see myself going in the direction of atheism, but I was open to listening to the other side.
You know what? I think you're exactly right there. I think the fact that you went from a semi-quasi Roman Catholic background to a Pentecostal to a Calvinist to a more of Armenian type Christian. Just the fact that you made so many transitions. If I think back at some of the precepts I've talked to, I think a lot of them were just Calvinist precepts from the get-go. So maybe that's an issue because you've already had to wrestle with those types of doubt and then release onto the new thing, doubt and release onto the new thing. And so maybe that's why you were more receptive to being wrong.
I will say this too, though. This is another interesting observation about this whole journey is that being in the military, I move around a lot.
Yeah.
And so that means that as much as I may love whatever church I was going to at the time, there was this break in my experience with that church where I would leave it, move to another area, and that the social element of religion, it captures your heart.
Yes.
And you feel yourself. If you're part of a church for years and years, you're not that likely to just be torn out of it. But when you move from one place to another, you're kind of forced out of your social context.
Yeah, that's another great point because I've always been somewhat of a maverick. I do well with very little relationship in my life. Like I just need one or two people. I did not care if people thought poorly of me if I wasn't in church for 3 weeks in a row. But yet there are Christians out there who, oh no, I have to go to church. I just have to. And they feel guilt if they don't. And I'm wondering if those are the types of people who would be very hard to leave a belief system because they want to meet this expectation of their friends and family and people at the church. And the fact that you were military and that you were forced to move from church to church to church kind of maybe made you more open to just, not going. So where did you meet your wife in all this?
Yeah. So this is another interesting part of the story. So I moved to Virginia, where I started going to that Reformed Baptist church where me and my wife met. And one way we met is not just that we were going to the same church, but we were also part of this street evangelism team as well, where a bunch of us would get people from different churches, just local people who gathered together weekly. And we would go out and do street evangelism at different events downtown, like late at night in front of bars.
But you're not a precept at this point, right? You are just a regular.
Actually, when I first started, I was.
Okay.
Yeah. When I first started going out doing street evangelism, at that point, I was still into presuppositionalism.
Okay, so you're out on the street as a precept evangelist, which is kind of ironic, but not really. Give me a little example, a little flavor of what type of street evangelist you were. Okay, so I meet you on the street, and you see me, make eye contact with you. What do you say to me?
Well, at one point, I discovered gospel tracts, and I loved them because gospel tracts were the perfect icebreaker. Because it's awkward walking up to somebody on the street,
right,
and just talking about religion. But a gospel tract I found to be a really good transition, like, hey, here's something for you to read. You got a minute? Or here's something for you to read. And do you have a Christian background at all? And you can build rapport too, along with all that. But that was a good icebreaker. So I would start with that. And then I would just talk with you. What background do you have? Do you have a Christian background? Oh, no? Okay.
So Raul, I was a Christian for 30 plus years and I'm no longer. What would you say to me?
I can't remember exactly. I mean, I followed Way of the Master for a while. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Yes, I have.
Okay, so it's it's like an evangelism. It's like a script, so to speak, where you focus on asking the person whether or not they've kept the law, meaning the 10 Commandments, and then you use that as like a launch pad to talk about how they haven't kept the law. Therefore, where would they go when they died if they're not 100% perfect and they were to stand before God and he were to judge them? Would you go to heaven or hell? And you take that approach and introduce to them the idea that you don't have to go to hell, right? You've broken the law, but Jesus took your place. He died the death.
But didn't you have like if you were saying this on the street, didn't you have people come up to you and say, well, I don't believe heaven and hell exist. So it could exist, but I don't have a good reason to think it does. So why should I worry? Like, did you have anybody say that to you?
Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, most people you run into the street just haven't really thought about it, honestly.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes you might get somebody like that. But I mean, being a presuppositionalist, like I didn't have to know all that. I didn't have to know all the all this arguments against to answer the atheist. I had to focus on, oh, you're an atheist, okay. Please explain to me as an atheist how you account for the validity of logic when your universe is by definition random. It has no order to it, no person behind it, holding it all together, and stuff like, the standard precept stuff.
Yeah. And I would say, well, there's different forms of logic, but logic, the three main laws are just a property of nature itself. Without existence, you can't have identity. And so I presuppose it. So when I talk to precepts, I become a precept myself, with very fundamental presuppositions.
One of the strongest presuppositional arguments, probably the most common, is the argument for morality. It's the easiest to bring up, and you get the most bang for your buck when talking with an atheist.
Yeah.
Because even as an atheist, I can say this: most atheists don't know how to answer it. They don't know how to talk about the philosophical foundations for a moral system that's not objective in the way that it is in a theistic system.
Well, the way, very, very, very briefly, the way I answer it is, I'll say very succinctly, I think, well-being, flourishing, human flourishing, unnecessary suffering is a pretty good goal to have. But I'm totally open, Raul, to the Christian morality. Just help me understand. I tend to be willing to learn, and have the Christian teach me why their foundation for morality is better than mine. But what it always ends up is divine command theory. Well, God said so. That's why it's good. Like, duh.
Yeah. And my thing now as a Christian or as an atheist is to say, how do you even know your standard exists?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like that's the main thing. Like, if whatever standard I appeal to, for whatever weaknesses it may have, the point is I can demonstrate it exists. I want to know that your standard, whatever it is, first of all, exists. Then we can talk about, the details.
So you're doing the street preaching. Your wife meets you on the street,
right? So she was, yeah. So back to that.
So
that
doesn't sound good, but
it's totally bizarre. So just because it sounds weird to even say it, but yeah, we were. A lot of times when we were dating, not even dating at the time, but when we first started hanging out before I asked her to, start dating like officially, is we would go out and like do evangelism and like pass out gospel tracts and stuff like that. Like that's what we did. Or sometimes we would even, this is real nerdy, but we would go to Starbucks and read some theology together, or watch a sermon together, like stuff like that,
So was she? Was your wife a Christian her whole life, born and raised into it?
Yeah, she actually was raised in a Christian home.
And what flavor of Christianity was she?
Probably like just non-denominational. I mean, definitely Bible believing, strongly like, evangelical, basically.
Okay, so this is very interesting to me. You meet her. Who doubted the most first, you or her?
Oh man, I was always bringing some weird new doctrine for us to consider. Not all the time, but like I was always the one doing it, and so it was.
So you're the one who led your wife to hell, is what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, so we know where you're going. Okay.
So it was. But we started lightweight. We didn't start with atheism. We started with infant baptism and Arminianism, and something other than the traditional doctrine of hell, and or maybe the possibility that the earth isn't young, or stuff like that.
Okay, and so what was the final straw for you since you left Christianity before she did? What was the final straw for you,
Yeah.
and then what happened for her to follow with you?
Well, for me, I, I came to accept the theory of evolution as a Christian. I became kind of disappointed with the Christian the creationist apologetics. I felt suspicious of them, that they always seem to be at odds with science. I was like, why are they always trying to fight against what seems to be obvious to everyone else? And after looking into it, I became convinced of evolution. And with that came a lot of thinking about the creation account. In other words, what is this? Because at first glance, it seems like this is like an ancient creation story, just like other stories that are not scientifically accurate. What is this? And so when I started thinking about that, I came to the conclusion that the creation account in the Bible appeared to be myth because it is myth, or at least mythical language. This is me as a Christian thinking it through. It's mythical language that the biblical writers were borrowing from the surrounding cultures as a way to communicate like divine truths. And so that's a conclusion I'd come to. And what I started thinking about was, wait a minute, if the creation account is couched in mythical language and it's not literal, where does that stop? Where does the seemingly mythical language stop, and where do they get to actual history? And I started looking at Genesis and walking through it and thinking, where does it stop?
See, but this is what puzzles my mind. Cannot compute this, because there are so many Christians out there who believe evolution via common descent. Even the Roman Catholic Church has stated that it's the policy of the church that they believe evolution. And there's a lot of, what we would call maybe liberal type Christians who have no problem with evolution and have no problem with Genesis being, a story, not anything close to literal, but they just love Jesus. Why didn't you go there? Why didn't you just stop believing that everything in the Bible had to be true and just love Jesus?
Well, as I was thinking about like, where does the myth stop, I came upon the story of Moses in my mind, and I'm thinking, is Moses historical? Like, I want to know if Moses is historical. Like, is that still like a mythical story? And I started looking in the historicity of the Exodus, and I found out that the argument that the Exodus is not a strictly speaking historical event is actually, like, even if you're not convinced of it, I had to at least admit to myself that it's a very real possibility that this was not historical. Like, just if you're just looking at the archaeology, if you're just looking at the history, if you're just looking at the evidence, I think you have to at least come away from all that and say, in all honesty, like, this is a possibility. And that shook me. That scared me. Not that I was convinced that Moses was a mythical figure or that the Exodus didn't happen the way the Bible said it did, but I saw that it was a very real possibility that it was.
Yeah, I hear you. I remember going to a church and for the very first time having a pastor say, well, maybe Adam and Eve didn't exist. That shook me up a little bit. Like, what? This is a pastor behind a pulpit saying this crass stuff? Like, this is blasphemy. But then, just like you, I started doing some research. So it was more where does myth stop? Where does truth, facts start? So you started doubting the whole Bible. Do you remember the day when you said to yourself, I don't believe any of this anymore? Do you remember that day?
I don't remember a specific day. I do remember the day when I said that to my wife, after thinking about it for a few weeks with myself and just coming more and more to the realization that, like, I just think the argument for the historicity of the Exodus is not that strong. And I said to myself, I don't think I can say that with certainty. And if that's the case, if something this monumental as Moses, as the Exodus event, if something that monumental is, I can't say with certainty is historical, like, I have an issue. Like, I don't know if I can trust the Bible the way I thought I could.
Did your wife cry? at that?
I honestly, I can't remember.
Because I know that's devastating to hear, because I've been through this. It's devastating to hear your spouse, I'm sure, say the thing that brought you together, i.e. Christianity, is now being severely doubted by you. And has she ever told you afterwards how that impacted her, like what she was feeling and thinking at that time?
Yeah, it was very hard. It was very hard. I think the initial reaction was not tears. The initial reaction was this, I don't know, I guess just listening to what I had to say. But as it settled in, as we started talking about the arguments and as she started basically agreeing with me on the issue, that's when like the shock started to come in, and her being like, wow, I cannot believe this. Like, it's like having the rug swept out from under you. It's a traumatic experience to have something like that taken from you, something that you thought was true, something that you cherished, something that was such an integral part of your identity. Like, for that to be taken from you is truly, truly traumatic.
How did you both handle the social aspect? Like, you were both going to a church at this time, I assume, right?
So yes, we were. So at this point, we had just moved to a new area.
Okay, that
which
helps.
goes back to what it always seems like whenever I had a change in duty station, I also coincided with the doctrinal transition. But at this point, we had just moved to a new area. And here's the ironic thing. The reason we moved to this area is because they had a church that we very much wanted to be a part of. And so we specifically picked this particular duty station because the denomination that we were interested in had a church in this locale. And we longed to be a part of that church that was so in line with our doctrinal position.
May I ask what church that was?
Yep. It's a Presbyterian denomination called the CREC, Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. And some of their doctrinal distinctives and why I was drawn to it was not the Calvinism. I would disagree with them there, but the other stuff really made up for it in my mind. It was their postmillennialism, which is a view about the end times, where they have a very optimistic view of the future, where they don't have like the end is near type of mentality where the things are just going to get worse and worse and worse until Jesus comes back. They're much more optimistic. It's called postmillennialism, where they think Jesus is on the throne. King Jesus is reigning. He's subduing all God's enemies under his feet. And the church has nothing but good times to look forward to as he subdues this world under his dominion.
How many
and
how many months were you at that church before you left the belief?
Not long. We arrived there, I would say, and that year it was like June, and then I started doubting in like August, September timeframe.
So you didn't have to actually go to the church and sort of have a sit down with the pastor and say, "Hey, I'm no longer believe," or did you do that?
No, we did. Yeah, we did, because we were so in love with the church that, we had embedded ourselves into it from the start, And actually, I had scheduled my membership, as signed up to become a member, which they do on certain Sundays. And so there was a certain Sunday where they were going to initiate certain new members into the church, including myself. I had scheduled that for me and my wife, and I had to cancel it. And that's when I sat down with the pastor and told him, like, hey, look, I'm not going to be able to do it. I can't, because, I told him about the doubts I was having, and he was.
So you had scheduled shocked. A membership, what do you call it, dedication or whatever, into the church, cancel it because you're no longer a believer. Wow. What did your pastor say?
He was shocked. He was shocked, and his first reaction was, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? Like, you struck me as such a strong believer. I don't understand where in the world is this coming from, was his like first reaction.
Yeah, and it's that question is, how do you answer that? Like, it's such a long journey, and there's so many factors involved. How did you just like? How long was the talk? Did you talk for hours and hours, or was it like a 10-minute talk? Or
Yeah, well, the initial talk was short. I just saw him at a coffee shop one day, and I told him. But we definitely met afterward. Like, we had him over to the house, him and the other pastor, more than once, to talk about our concerns, to see what answers they might provide. So, so they kind of they were gracious in like listening to our concerns, and they had some answers, of course.
how did your church friends treat you after this?
It's a hard experience, because at that point, once you decide that you're no longer going to be a Christian, like my mentality was, I love this church and I love these people. This is my family as far as I'm concerned, even though I hadn't been here too long, but as I still longed to be part of a community where people look out for me and where I can be connected. And so because of that, I was inclined to keep going to church in spite of my doubts. Just keep going. Like, I can't say I believe these things, but if you'll have me, I'll stick around. But I found that to be hard. I just felt like a black sheep. I knew what people thought, and at one point I went to the church, and they have this point in the service before the sermon where they do public prayers. They'll pray for various issues. And one of the things they prayed for this particular Sunday was for me and my wife to repent.
Oh.
And this was a public prayer. And so that, when that happened, I just felt so called out. So,
and
not
they knew you were there?
Yeah. Yeah.
My goodness.
I think I have a feeling, because I hadn't gone for the previous few Sundays. I have a feeling they didn't expect us to be there, and
they couldn't call an audible on the fly and change it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Christians, if you're listening to this is what not to do if you want any hope of having an atheist come back to the fold. Don't pray for them in front of the whole church to repent. Well, you can, I guess, but it's not going to help. Wow. Man. Well, I have a whole series on my YouTube channel on why I no longer go to church, sermons like these. And I think I personally would find it difficult to go back to church, because I'd be just sitting there, and everything the pastor says or everything that's said during the service, my mind would be going, yeah, but what about this? What about that? Did you know this? Did you know that? And it would be just so frustrating for me I would have to, take this duct tape and, put it over my mouth.
Yeah. Another thing I found difficult with going to church at that point was that I just felt like everything that was going on was just, I felt it hard to like listen to the songs and realizing these people are worshiping a falsehood. It was that became very hard for me.
So I just want to review, because someone's in the chat talking about leaving a bad church having a bad church is not a good reason to leave the faith, in quotes. But with Raul, that wasn't the case. You left because not of the church, but because of the Bible, basically, doubting that it was true. So I guess what's interesting about you and me is we both left, I think, for similar reasons, that we just didn't think the core propositions were true anymore. But yet, both you and I practice this thing called street epistemology, which most of the time doesn't even delve, not even close to theological things, right? We ask questions and so forth. Have you ever asked yourself, maybe your time is better served going up to Christians and just talking theology for hours rather than asking them questions using the Socratic method? Anthony Magnabosco is going to hate me for asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, even doing street epistemology, you know, I do sometimes I struggle with, you know, when do you bring up like more evidence, use a more evidence-based approach. I mean, I tried that for a long while after I left Christianity with, you know, of course, because people, they express all kinds of concern when they realize that you're no longer a Christian, and you have all these discussions with them about your concerns. And so I had a lot of those kind of discussions. And I mean, I found it to not be helpful. And so when I found out about street epistemology, I don't know, it was, I don't know. I guess the whole conversation about the backfire effect, I guess I experienced enough of that to know that this way, at least for now, I'm going to try it out. And it seems like it perhaps is a better approach. You know?
Yeah. You know, sometimes I use the backfire effect to my advantage and do role play, but very few Christians will role play as an atheist. They actually think it's a sin. Some of them think it's a sin to do so. But if you can get a Christian to role play as an atheist and then question them hard, like on atheism, you'll get the backfire effect on the role play. So, but yeah,
Wow.
that's the dark arts, right?
Yeah, really. That's pretty sinister.
But like I try really hard to build a rapport with Christians, and Christians try really hard to build a rapport with me. And we kind of, I think, both know what we're doing, right? Like the Christian knows, you know, if I just listen to Doug with an open heart and an open mind and pray for him, someday he'll come around. And I'm probably thinking, you know, if I just show them that, hey, as an atheist, I'm a moral guy, and I do all these things. I'm not, you know, one of these crazy postmodern thinkers who just wants to kill babies in the womb. You know, we're both trying to have this, I think, attitude of civility, which I think is good. But sometimes I wonder, how much do I just delve into it and ask the questions that got you to doubt? Or how much do I just keep with the questions? Like I've been doing this for a couple years now, and I don't know an answer to that. Like if you watch my channel, it's a mixture of both. The only thing I can think of is I have to sort of gauge the nonverbal cues that I'm getting. And if I sense they're getting defensive, I switch to questions. But if I think that they're okay with all this, then we can start delving into the facts, or the theology, if they're a Christian or a Muslim. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, it seems common sense to me. You know, if somebody's open to hearing some arguments, and you think the risk of backfire effect is low enough to proceed, I mean, you know, why not? I mean, I think it's hard, because I think our tendency is when we have a method, sometimes we can come to treat the method as gospel, and that if you dare veer away from strictly asking questions, how like you're being unfaithful to the method, you know. But you need to have more nuanced, perhaps, view of things, you know, when it comes to it.
Yeah, the great thing about street epistemology, it did give me a community that I desperately needed at that time. I still need it. So that is great. But I since my nature is one of rebellion, I've always been a maverick of sorts. I do get scared that I don't want SCE to become another church. With dogma and so forth.
I think the cash money of street epistemology is the self-reflection that it's aiming to produce in the person, because that's hard to do for oneself. you know, it's hard to see your own blind spots. And I think SE is really helpful in helping people reflect upon whatever blind spots they have.
How many of the Christian friends you had stuck with you through all this that you could call up right now and ask a favor of and they'll do it, or that you'd feel totally comfortable sitting on a couch watching a movie together?
Probably in the minority, but there's definitely at least a couple I can think of off the top of my head that like I can do that with. But and then there's others who are just so intent on bringing me back to the fold that something like that would be awkward.
What's the percentage chance that you would go back to Christianity? 0 to 100. 100 being that it's certain that you're going to go back to Christianity, and 0 being no chance. Where do you?
Sure. Yeah. I would say if I were being charitable, maybe 10%.
10%. Well, that's pretty good. You heard it here, Christians. go to Raul's YouTube channel and start working. Get a 1 in 10 chance.
It's Christianity is something that I'm less convinced of than like the general theism, because
yes.
Christianity has an actual artifact, namely the Bible, that you can critique, whereas theism is so vague of a proposition. It's just like some God who transcends all creation, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about deism, and I actually, if someone comes on and I'm interviewing them, or I'm talking to them via text, and they tell me that, hey, I'm a deist. I mean, I believe in God. I think all religions on the planet are wrong. But, you know, just it's kind of cool thinking of a God up there. It gives me comfort, helps me answer some questions. I know the arguments on both sides of why that is bad, but I personally, my goal is to just put a little bit of doubt in the fundamentalists, the ones who are just cocksure that they're right and can't be wrong, because I think that leads to arrogance and violence in the worst case.
Yeah, I think deism is like, it's one of the least it's one of those forms of theism that we have the least to worry about, because they don't have a lot of the dogmatism that comes with the revealed religions, you know.
But what about Christianity? What would you? So that 10% is for deism, or Christianity?
No. I mean, yeah, I guess I would be more likely if I were to pick any form of theism, it would be deism, because that's, to me, that's the most rational stance. But still, it has its. I made a stop over to deism on my way out of Christianity, but and I came to the conclusion that there's still, the argument's still not strong enough to make that kind of claim with any degree of certainty.
I always say that deism is at the top of a tent like this, and so if you're a theist on this side, if you're going to become an atheist, you always make the pit stop on the top of the tent there at deism for a little while, and then you fall off to atheism. And the reverse is true. If you're an atheist and you become a Christian, oftentimes it's like, hey, there has to be a God. There just has to. So now which God is it? And then they come back on that side. Well, yeah, I think for me, maybe a 1% chance I'd return to Christianity. And well, let me ask you this. This is a question that's asked of atheists, and a lot of atheists give an answer that I don't like. So I'm putting pressure on you here. What would it take for you to change your mind and become a Christian again?
It would take the opposite of what made me a non-Christian. I mean, that would be a satisfactory answer to all the biblical issues that I found with the Bible. It would have to be shown that Jesus wasn't a false prophet after all, or that there really aren't these gross moral issues with the God of the Old Testament, or that there's no historical inaccuracies in the Bible, or it would have to be undoing all those issues that I found with the Bible, which just to me seems so incredibly unlikely. But that's what it would be.
But let's say the Bible was perfect, no errors, everything in your mind matches up. Do you think that's still a reasonable justification to believe it's true?
What do you mean by perfect? So historically perfect, like
Well,
archaeologically, like.
it well you can't, we don't have a time machine, so we can't go back. But let's say, like, I'm hearing from you that you saw inconsistencies in the scriptures. Things didn't add up.
Say,
That you saw inconsistencies in the scriptures and things didn't add up.
oh yeah.
Um, I guess what the point I'm getting at is the level. It's really hard for me to envision historical evidence rising to the level high enough to justify a miracle claim, like someone rising from the dead after 3 days. And not only that, that person has to be God in flesh, or the vicarious redemption idea. It's really hard for me to imagine me accepting that type of evidence. I think, and if a Christian's listening right now, you can call my epistemology flawed, but it is my epistemology. So the answer I give is I would need to see such a powerful miracle that it would be crazy of me to deny it. And I'm not talking about someone's leg being lengthening in church, or back pain gone, or, it has to be akin to an amputee getting his arm back at the name of Jesus. And over again. Yeah. And that would, and even then, I wouldn't say I'm 100% convinced, but it would be enough for me to believe again.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I share your skepticism as far as the ability of history to establish a miracle. It's not equipped to establish something like that, because our normative experience is so weighty. We dead people don't rise from the dead again and again and again and again, and that's such an established fact that something like ancient history that's based on secondhand accounts and hearsay, and it's separated by thousands of years, it's just not equipped to overturn that.
What advice would you give to Christians who might be listening to this on how best to witness to you?
I would say start by listening, and don't make any assumptions on my character. Like that's the thing that's I would say is the most unhelpful when I talk with Christians now, is when I talk with them, and number one, they don't listen to me first, but number two, they're too quick to judge my motives, that I'm not really concerned about the truth. I really just don't want God to exist, which is silly on so many levels, but it's so presumptuous.
Yeah, I hear you. For me, the answer would be totally open and honest with me. Like, if you're a Christian and you want to witness to me, I desire total honesty. So if I ask you a question and it's uncomfortable to answer that question, answer it anyway and just be honest. And if I ask you if you have doubts, and what are those doubts, be honest. Let the world know what you struggle with. Because I feel so many times that it's like, no, I got to defend this. I got to build walls around myself to protect me from this, spiritual warfare thing. Oh, that's how much time do you have left?
I can go for another 5 minutes or so.
Psychologically is a good word. How did you feel after you left Christianity? Did you feel better? Did you feel worse? Did you feel worse than better? Did you feel better than worse? Like, emotionally, psychologically, what happened?
I mean, well, I described it before as traumatic, and it is. I mean, at first, it's kind of sickening to lose something like that. It makes you, like, psychologically nauseous to have lost something like that, and it takes a lot of getting used to. It's like you're a traveler in a foreign land, and you're getting used to all this new terrain. And you're thinking, you have to completely rework the furniture of your thinking. And so it felt kind of disorienting. And at the same time, I had a lot of thinking to do with figuring out how the world fits together if God doesn't exist.
Do you feel that you did indeed lose meaning and purpose in your life?
Initially, yes, but I had to think about like the nature of meaning and purpose in a non-theistic framework, and just rework my understanding of what meaning and purpose is, and realize that what Christianity says meaning and purpose is cannot be really established with a high enough level of certainty, so that they want to say that meaning and purpose is this transcendental absolute fact about reality, and I just don't accept that as something that can be demonstrated. And so it's a false claim, and it's fake. It's like fake money. The meaning and purpose that they want to sell is like fake money.
Did you feel more desire to like just cheat a little bit on things, or do things like you now don't believe a God's watching over you, so there's no accountability, right? Like you don't have to be accountable to a God or to the people in the church. Did you feel like you could treat your fellow man differently?
For the most part, no. I mean, I think a lot of what drives religious sentiments regarding like a respect for human life, a desire to take care of the poor, the needy, a lot of those things are really just human inclinations. We're a social species. We feel connected to others. We have this inborn empathy that we've inherited from our evolutionary past. This is part of being a pro-social species. It's the mammalian inclination that we have built into our DNA. And so I think because of that, there's just certain inclinations we have. And I want to embrace that. I want to embrace what it means to be human. And at the same time, there are other tendencies we have as advanced apes that I don't think are helpful, like our tribalism, for instance. And those things that, I feel free to reject because of how unhelpful they are to living in a world that is conducive to human happiness.
I had a long Facebook chat with a Muslim gentleman yesterday, and we were talking about morality, and he said, even if I was to leave Islam, I still think Islam is a great structure, a great worldview to encourage people treating each other well. And I pointed out I asked them this question. I said, okay, imagine a situation where a great example is the $100 bill example, where someone is walking in front of you, drops a $100 bill, you go to pick it up, and then you go to put it in your own pocket, but then you see the person turn around and look at you, and you immediately you take the $100 bill and you say, "Here you go, you dropped this, sir." Oh, thank you very much. You're such an honest person. And then the second scenario is you're walking along, you see a person in front of you drop a $100 bill, and you go and pick it up, and you, instead of reaching it into your pocket, putting it in your pocket, you immediately say, "Excuse me, sir, did you drop this?" Or, "Here, you dropped this." Which of those two people do you respect more? The one who had to do the right thing when they knew they were being watched, or the one who just immediately went and did the right thing? And so I was giving this example to this Muslim gentleman that, maybe it's better off as humans to just do the right thing for its own sake, and because that's what you would want people to do for you. I actually have good feelings inside me when I do the right thing. Maybe you will too. You don't need this God, this moral framework from a deity to do that. In other words, we can cut out the middleman.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Yeah, and I agree. There's definitely some anyway, yeah, you make a good point.
But I really enjoyed, I tell you, we covered a lot of topics in a short time. Well, I think we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes or so, but I really enjoyed this. Hang around after I go off live. I want to talk to you a little bit more. But yeah, we had quite a few people watching. So thank you everybody in chat for showing up. Sorry, JD Goodwin, that you came back and now we're leaving. I will be doing another critique video soon on Greg Lawson on hell, and that should be fun. So look out for that. So take care, guys. We'll see you next time.